The small town of Dunblane in central Scotland is tonight in deep shock and mourning after the massacre today of 16 children and their teacher in a local primary school. The children, aged between 5 and 6, were shot dead in the school gymnasium by a former scout leader, Thomas Hamilton, who then shot himself. 15 of the children, pictured here with their teacher, Gwen Mayer, died at the scene. One died later in hospital. Most of the others were wounded, some seriously. Tonight the injured are being treated in hospitals in nearby Stirling and in Glasgow. In Dunblane tonight is our correspondent, Brian O'Connell. Brian.
Well, tonight here in Dunblane, the sense of loss is almost palpable. You can almost feel it. People are trying to come to terms with what happened. They don't know why it happened, and they certainly don't know why it happened here. Tonight they're still dealing with the injured in Stirling Royal Infirmary. Were taken here to Stirling Royal Infirmary. 3 seriously injured children were later transferred to another hospital, but there are still 2 children here in intensive care. 2 others are now in the children's ward having had surgery, and there are 2 injured adults. Many of the wounded children had several gunshot wounds. Tonight, medical staff who were first on the scene have been describing what they encountered.
We arrived as a group, and our job is to assess the injuries, so we decided we all went for individual children and decided who had priority for immediate evacuation and who could wait for the second phase of evacuation.
At Dunblane's primary school, the scene of the horror, tonight people have been leaving flowers at the gate. They wonder why it happened and why it happened here. Dunblane is a close-knit rural community trying to come to terms with a senseless act of violence.
Earlier this evening, Brian O'Connell spoke to one mother who was late bringing her child to the primary school this morning. Diane Fraser arrived while the gunman was still causing carnage.
When I arrived at the school, there was a gunshot and a teacher cried out to us to run, and we ran to a room where the children were having a music lesson. We were going to have a music lesson, and from there somebody came and asked would some of us come to the gymnasium as they needed adult help. And we went along there and found that there were lots of children and teacher injured. We couldn't really see the extent of the injuries at first, and there were about 5 children were carried out into the corridor alongside the gymnasium, and we just did what we could for the children, was sat with them for about 45 minutes at least before an ambulance arrived.
Were the children badly injured?
They didn't seem to be critically injured, but some of them had gunshot wounds. It appeared as if they'd got gunshot wounds that had gone right through the body, right through their arm, out to the other side. But they had lots of superficial cuts. And as I say, it was a long time before, 45 minutes at least before the first ambulance arrived. And that
Why did it take so long?
I don't know. I don't know whether it was a lack of communication or whether there just weren't the services available. I don't know. But the police were there, and we were asking several times where the ambulances were, and they said they were on the way.
So the children must have been in some distress?
They were extremely distressed, and there was only one telephone line, so we couldn't telephone for their parents either, and they just wanted their parents to come and comfort them. But we did the best that we could.
What did you do?
Well, we just put bandages onto their wounds, and we just really comforted them. So kept them warm. And they were suffering from shock, and in total I would say it was an hour and a half before they were actually seen by a doctor. And by that time they were very, very shocked and becoming very stiff and upset.
And at what point did the police arrive?
The police arrived quite soon. One police car arrived quite soon on the scene, and then within about 3/4 of an hour there were lots of police, but still no ambulance.
Did the police then attempt to find out where the ambulances were?
Yes, I think they did.
And have you had any explanation as to why it took 3/4 of an hour for the ambulance
to arrive? No, I haven't. No.
Brian, as you said a moment ago, people in Dunblane tonight must be numb with grief. But what news is there of the survivors, of the casualties being treated tonight?
Sorry, I can't hear you very clearly. Could you repeat the question?
What is the news about the casualties?
Well, news about the casualties are that there are 2 children still in intensive care at Stirling Royal Infirmary. 3 other children were transferred, and there are 2 adults who are very seriously injured as well in Stirling Royal Infirmary at the moment. As you know, 1 teacher was killed, 2 other adults were injured in the gym. I think, though, as well as that, it's the psychological casualty as much as anything else. They brought in teams of counsellors here at the moment. It's a bit similar to after the Hungerford massacre, if you remember, in 1989. And it's the psychological damage that's done not just to the children, not just to the parents, but almost the whole town. It's a very small, close-knit community here that is really going to be the cost.
And what about the gunman, Thomas Hamilton? What details are emerging about the sort of man he was?
He was a loner, we know that. He lived in Stirling. He was a member of a gun club, and he was a former scoutmaster. He had been chucked out of the Scouts because of what they describe as inappropriate behaviour. More than that at the moment we don't know, but he certainly was a strange man who lived alone, very much a loner.
Brian, thank you very much for that. There we leave it. The children of primary class 1 were playing in the school gymnasium when the gunman burst in at about 9:15 and opened fire. News of the attack spread quickly through the town as parents rushed to the school, not knowing if their children were alive or dead.
It has been described as the slaughter of the innocents. After news of the bizarre and horrific tragedy spread around Dunblane, parents frantically made their way to the school. For each one of them, the horrible nightmare of waiting to see whose children were dead.
First everything was normal, and then there was 8 gunshots, and then the police came and everything got so noisy, and I got scared.
About 20 to 9, we'd just been doing a bit of reading until our teacher got our work sorted out, and then we heard these gunshots in the gym. We looked down and thought, oh, he must just be firing at a target or something. Then he came out to our fire exit and started firing at our huts, and God, we were all petrified.
One school board member attempted to describe her mixed emotions of anguish at the Dunblane massacre and relief that her 3 children were alive.
I don't know how long it was, just waiting, wandering, trying to keep the children unaware that there's anything wrong. And Mrs. Giles was called out of the classroom to help to go to the gym. And I just found out that at that stage I knew it was primary 1, and then I found out that it wasn't my daughter's class, and I felt relieved, and then I felt terribly guilty that I felt relieved.
At a police briefing in Dunblane today, Shadow Scottish Secretary and local man George Robertson spoke of this act of unspeakable brutality.
I'm bound to know that many of the casualties and the parents concerned, I know just how traumatic and devastating it will be in this town today.
Queen Elizabeth has sent her heartfelt sympathy to the people of Dunblane, and Prime Minister John Major has described the massacre as this mad and evil act.
They were where they should have been safe. They're perhaps of a generation that has more to look forward to in optimism and hope than any before. And suddenly this appalling act just snuffs out all that opportunity.
I don't think that words can really describe the depth of the tragedy and the horror that people will feel. These were little children who at the weekend would have been playing with their brothers and sisters and their mothers and fathers, who went out to school today with the whole of their lives in front of them, and now nothing.
Tonight in Dunblane, the normally tranquil Highlands town is laden with unspeakable grief. This recent photograph is a poignant memory of Gwen Mayer and her primary 1 class.
School children have been the targets of deranged attacks in the past. Experts, desperate to understand the motivation behind such outrages, say that typically the attackers harbour deep feelings of resentment and bitterness, and have been building up to their crimes for some time.
Before today's horrendous attack in Dunblane, the previous worst single shooting in Britain was in the town of Hungerford in Berkshire in 1987. Michael Ryan, armed with a Kalashnikov semi-automatic rifle, embarked on an hour-long rampage through the town, leaving 16 dead before taking refuge in a local school and killing himself. Ryan, like Thomas Hamilton, was a gun enthusiast and gun club member, and new controls on automatic weapons were introduced in the wake of the Hungerford attack. Crowded and with easy access, schools have proved an all-too-easy target for deranged attacks. In Paris 3 years ago, a lone gunman demanding a ransom held a class of preschool children hostage for days. A police siege